Hey everyone. Today I'm going to give a review of a book that I read about half a year ago and actually wrote the review then, but I just never was in the mood for really filming it. I wasn't super excited about my review. I think it's one worth presenting since I bothered to write it on the first place. I think maybe part of that is because it is a young adult book, and as someone who is simply an adult at this point and doesn't really read young adult books too often, unlike a librarian or a bookstore employee whose job is to recommend books for young adults, I kind of doubted that my opinion on it is the most valuable. And certainly I question whether, as someone who normally just reads adult fiction, whether it even makes sense for me to read a young adult book and say anything recommending it or not recommending it to other adults or young adults. I could probably do another video on whether I think young adult books are worth it for me personally to read. I guess the short answer is yes, sometimes. Anyway, all of that is just my internal dilemma that I went through before deciding that I'm going to do this review today on a young adult book, which is On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. So following my enjoyment of the book The Hate You Give, which I also reviewed on this channel a while back, I think given the cultural influence of the book, it's one that I'd recommend for anyone who interacts with children or young adults in any capacity whatsoever. And even for adults, I think there's stuff that we can take out of it. And I found the book pretty captivating and easy to read, so I was pretty interested to see what author Angie Thomas came up with next. So I then picked up On the Come Up, a story about an aspiring teen rapper who is also going through some other challenges in her life. This one I snagged as an audiobook from the local library, as there was a much shorter wait time than for The Hate You Give. And also, as I mentioned, it is a young adult novel, which I am not, but I thought it was going to be worth reading. I'll say real quickly that there will be no major spoilers in this video, so don't worry if you're thinking about reading it yourself that you're going to have anything spoiled. This book is not Concrete Rose, which I think I mentioned at the end of my review for The Hate You Give. That one is a direct prequel to The Hate You Give. I've actually read that one now at this point as well. Interestingly, this book does take place in the same neighborhood as The Hate You Give. In fact, there are references to the major events of that book. It's about some innocent kid getting killed by the cops recently, and then the neighborhood being damaged by rioting that followed during protests, and subsequently increased police presence. And in some ways, this is hinted as being relevant to why some of the main characters are now struggling financially, I guess, due to the damage and the aftermath of that. The same gangs that were mentioned in that book are relevant here too. The main gang in the other one was the King Lords, but in this book, some of the main characters are closer with the rival gang, the Garden Disciples. But other than taking place within the same fictional community, the characters in this book are entirely separate. Because as Angie Thomas comments jokingly in her interview with Trevor Noah that I've linked, actually not all black people know one another. So as I mentioned, this book is about an aspiring teen rapper, Bree, who has to balance her ambitions to make it big in the rap community with her mom's desire for her to also do well at school and just generally be safe and everything like that. She will soon find herself at the center of an unexpected controversy, and I won't say anything more than that right now because I wouldn't want to give it away, although you may kind of guess from the overall topic of the book and of this review. But what happens is it brings about a lot of interesting and important broader discussions, while also forcing even a little bit of reflection on the behalf of the main character, Bree, who's a little less well-behaved, or maybe I should just say a little bit more impulsive than Star Carter, the protagonist of The Hate You Give. But this is great, because I like to see a character different from the one that we got in that novel. So given Bree's interest in the focus of the story, rap battles are a big part of the story. We saw a little bit of this in The Hate You Give, including the title of the book, which itself is a rap reference, but I won't say more about that in case you haven't read that one, because it is best to hear it from the characters themselves. But here, the rap culture is front and center. I myself know just a little bit of rap history because my roommate in college was a huge fan of old school hip hop, so he schooled me in that genre quite a bit. I've enjoyed some rap listening since then, and I broadly like the genre, but I'm not really what you call a rap enthusiast, and certainly I don't appreciate it on the same level as someone who grew up listening to it and relating to it. Anyway, there are a lot of references, some to old school rappers and some to newer ones. I can't really speak to how well represented the old school scene is, but then again, we are also talking about a teenager who's probably a millennial or younger, so she's not influenced by all the older rappers in the same way that she is by some of the most well-known legends like Biggie, Nas, Tupac, but there are plenty of other rappers at least mentioned in the book too. If you're like a real hip-hop head, you might be wishing she talked about some even more esoteric stuff, I don't know, but my impression is that she goes pretty deep in her rap repertoire, but also puts in enough of the more accessible tidbits so that even someone like me or a casual rap listener will get some of the references. And I can only assume that Angie Thomas is a fan and fairly knowledgeable about rap based on the fact that it's appeared to some extent in all of her books that I read, and frankly, I think it would have been hard to convincingly fake this one without at least doing her research. Like during the rap battles, we learn a little bit about the technique and what makes good rap versus bad rap, especially within the context of freestyling, and the description of how not to freestyle reminded me of the infamous BlackBerry freestyle video from Drake and the parody that surfaced afterwards, both of which I also had the joy of listening to in college. Also, I have to give it to her, this other rapper who Bree faces in her first rap battle is frankly a hilarious portrayal of what the author clearly sees as inauthentic rappers attempting to give off a certain vibe, but in a way that just caters directly and shamelessly to the mainstream pop audience. This guy is hugely popular despite his vapid lyrics that I hope will make others laugh as much as I did. And yes, I actually was laughing out loud to myself throughout this section as I was walking around outside in the neighborhood listening to it, because it's pretty funny. By contrast, many of Bree's raps, at least in my opinion, really were pretty good, at least to the extent I could feel them from Bonnie Turpin's skillful narration of the audiobook, so I have to give it to Angie Thomas for coming up with these lyrics for her main character. Better still, though, are the broader discussions that eventually arise around rap music, particularly songs with gangster rap style lyrics, and the way that it can potentially influence people in both positive and negative ways. Conversations that I'm sure anyone who has been a hip-hop fan for more than a few years will have seen before, probably multiple times. I was happy to see that Angie Thomas portrays all sorts of perspectives on it, and the best part was that although some of the more extreme opinions will be pretty unsympathetic to readers, I left this middle section of the book, which was in my opinion the strongest section, feeling like there were several characters with different views on the role of rap music, but who all were treated as having valid and legitimate reasons for their opinions. I viewed this section through my own lens of having discovered rap music in college and having asked myself many of the same questions, and I was also thinking about connections with a specific chapter of Michelle Alexander's nonfiction book, The New Jim Crow, which talks about how society's sort of default criminalization of black people living in inner city neighborhoods leads many young black kids to embrace a gangster mentality, the sort of idea that if you're going to call me a thug no matter what I do, then fine, I'm going to be a thug, and I'm going to embrace it because that's all I can be. And this is a sentiment that I also found occasionally echoed in the book too, which was an interesting connection. But I'm sure it will speak to everyone differently, and they'll have different characters whose opinions they most agree with. One thing I will say though is that I was a little surprised at just how little the main character's rap passion permeates the rest of her life and personality. Like, we hear how much she loves rap, we hear the facts about it, and we hear her at the rap battles, but I would have thought that someone like this is constantly thinking in terms of raps and rhymes, like almost turning life and conversation itself into a sort of word game and thinking about how to express things the most eloquently and cleverly. And, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I underestimate how much a rapper separates her rap life from the rest of her life and her mind and identity. But to me, it just kind of felt like I wasn't sure I was totally buying that this was the same character we were seeing in the ring, flaunting her lyrical talents. Even the rhymes she does think of in her head occasionally never seem to materialize anywhere else in the form of actual raps, which ends up to me feeling a little bit clunky. Now, I went into this book wanting to read it as its own work without comparison, but in some ways, Angie Thomas does invite comparisons for better or for worse, starting with the book being set in the same fictional neighborhood of Garden Heights as The Hate U Give. It covers some of the same side themes like gangs and drug use, but at the same time it does go in a different direction, and it explores some things that we didn't quite see so much of in The Hate U Give. It's also stylistically very similar, like the characters, the pacing, the setting, and everything just give off a similar vibe, I guess, which could be a good thing depending on what you're looking for. I mean, maybe some of it is just the teen speak, if you want to call it that, which I guess I'm not totally used to. But even if Bree and Star are different characters in terms of personality, the banter and interactions between them and their friends, siblings, parents often feel kind of stylistically similar. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but I just felt like, especially for the first third of the book, despite the plot going in a different direction, it didn't feel quite as fresh as The Hate U Give did for me. Still, as the characters diverge more, we learn more about them, and they face different challenges, I began to appreciate On the Come Up a lot more just for itself, and to stop making the comparisons, even though I'd still say it has the same vibe to it, which again, I liked the vibe of The Hate U Give overall, so maybe not such a bad thing. So the overall plot is one that I found pretty interesting, and while it's predictable in some aspects, there always was enough uncertainty or characters reacting in ways that were surprising enough to keep me on my toes, and to not make me feel like halfway through the book I'd already worked out how the rest of it would go. The characters too are interesting, though while a few of the side characters really caught my attention, I didn't find quite as many of the side characters to be as captivating as some of those in The Hate U Give, like Star's father Maverick. As I mentioned, the middle third of the book is quite good, full of important and interesting discussions, and it's the part that I really enjoyed the most of all. The ending, without giving anything away, unfortunately feels rather abrupt and not that satisfying for all that we've come through to get here. At one point I looked at the audiobook and saw there were only 20 minutes left and started getting a little concerned as I saw the time running out and things still not getting particularly well resolved. Jesse from Bow Ties and Books, in a review that I've linked in the description, as well as some of the other Goodreads reviews I read, voiced similar sentiments, but that isn't enough to stop me from recommending the book if you're interested, and I think even some adults may enjoy it, even though we're not the target audience. It was an easy and natural read, and it just pulls you along. It never leaves you hanging with these long parts where simply nothing is happening. That's all for today's review, so don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more weekly reviews on this and all sorts of other interesting books I've been reading lately. But until then, bye and happy reading.